So this week I was planning on making the next episode for the Ocarina of Time Dungeon Review series, but because of summer drawing to a close, I've been busier than usual, so I decided to put it off for a week. I also wanted to make a more relaxed, chill video than the previous one, something that would take less time to make and be a little more rantish. Anyway, before I get into the things I take issue with in anime, I should acknowledge that I am in fact a huge weeb. So don't take anything I say too personally. As a whole, I would say that anime is better than anything the West has to offer animation-wise, and has become a standard that I hold a lot of media I like too. It's nice to know that there's still an industry that prefers 2D animation to 3D, which is to say an industry that cares about quality to some degree. The things I really dislike about the genre are really more nitpicky than actual game-breaking issues. I'm going to separate what I have gripes with into two categories. The first being with the narrative and the second being technical aspects. So being a fine connoisseur of this art form referred to as anime, I have noticed that there are several main kinds of main characters. Some are completely innocent and lovable, others are fierce and determined, most of them are fine, but I absolutely cannot stand the douche genius smarter than everyone else type. I don't hate every character that happens to be evil in some way, it's mostly when they try to present these characters as deep and nuanced that problems arise. I think it's mostly the result of the show trying to push some narrative, something like, well, this guy was a real horrible human being, but in the end he did have pure intentions and he did accomplish some very good things as a result of everything. But that's not really nuance. It can be, but most of the time it's really the narrative twisting the events of the plot in a positive light to fit some sort of message. While this isn't an anime example, I feel like it's perfect for illustrating what I mean here. In Star Wars The Last Jedi, just about every character is a total idiot, and their actions result in the deaths of just about everybody. The only character that has any sort of awareness and acts appropriately is Poe Dameron. He has to destroy the First Order's superweapon or it's game over. So he does. He has very good reason to suspect his new leader is a fraud, so he goes behind her back to save the Alliance. But of course, the whole narrative of the film paints him as a reckless idiot that was the real cause of concern. But clearly this is a skewed interpretation of events. The movie tries to say that the totally inane and incompetent leader was the wise and trustworthy one, and the reasonable and quick-thinking Poe was stupid and childish. Look, I don't like it when writers can't even interpret their own stories correctly. I would rather just have these characters be portrayed exactly as they are, if the writers have to invent a new perspective to make them look a certain way. If a character is to be good, then have them do good things. It's a little dumb to say they're good and never show it. Another thing that really bothers me is when characters never get a chance to have meaningful dialogue. Every moment is spent with the characters screaming at each other, making the same stock joke for the 100th time, or giving a grandiose speech that ends with all characters present being deeply emotionally impacted. Like the amount of times Naruto has cried on his little swing is kind of dumb. I really wish characters could just learn to express themselves a little more normally, or at least express themselves in a meaningful fashion that relates to who they are as characters. I think the reason I really take issue with this is simply because it intrudes on what could be meaningful dialogue. Take Full Metal Alchemist, for example. The show's pacing moves at 100 miles an hour and barely lets up for basic character interactions that are not immediately tied to the plot. Nearly every exchange that has any meaning is interrupted by a joke. Like, look, I just want to see these characters for who they are. The excessive jokes make them feel like they belong in a cartoon. One of my favorite scenes from Avatar: The Last Airbender occurs in what would normally be considered a filler episode. It's about the series' main villains and how they attempt to live normal teenage lives in the Fire Nation. The episode is super funny as they're all not accustomed to normal life in the slightest, but the most impactful scene occurs near the end of the episode, where everybody's just chilling around a campfire by the beach. Sure, there still are jokes, but they stay in character while doing so, and nobody breaks the mood of the scene. Nobody turns into a chibi and screams at somebody else. Instead, everyone just sits around and pours out their deepest insecurities. This scene is an excellent example of how characters can have fun interactions, while still remaining true to themselves. More of this, less of the immersion-breaking lol so funny humor. I've already talked about this before, but I think I can go into more detail about it now. While I do appreciate how anime is made, as in 2D animation, I absolutely cannot stand the style that most shows adapt. 2D animation is great because it allows for an absurd amount of artistic style and flair. So as you can imagine, it's a little frustrating that most shows look exactly the same as one another. I know it's not something exclusive to this genre, as nearly all American cartoons have the same issue, but the style that anime is known for is so ugly. I'm not at all a fan of the bug-eyed, spiky-haired, slim-bodied, angular style that dominates the industry. My favorite shows are the ones that break this mold for the sake of something original. Dragon Ball, Naruto, and Hunter x Hunter break this mold and therefore look distinct and far more memorable because of it. I think we've all been there before. You're on your way home from school watching your favorite anime when you can tell it's all about to go down. The frame rate suddenly jumps from a respectable 1.5 frames per minute to faster than the human eye can even detect. The soundtrack cuts and you can hear the faint beginning of that hype opening song that you've been listening to for the past few months because you have no tastes. And the final clue that what's coming next just might be the most legendary moment of your entire existence is that this is the final episode of a 3-year-long arc. And the show has looked like the first draft of a cave painting for several months now, so you instinctively know that the budget for the last 10 episodes got absorbed by the next 60 seconds. And then after all that waiting, it happens. The most beautifully animated, amazingly choreographed, stunningly directed fight sequence that easily takes the #1 position of every top 10 epic anime fight scenes video goes down. And okay, I can't see what's happening. So it wasn't until Attack on Titan that I began to notice this trend. Every time anything cool happened, the screen would darken and smudge over everything. Because it occurred so often, I became genuinely annoyed with it and eventually lost interest in the show. I know that sounds petty, but hang with me here. I could not bear the fact that somebody thought it was a good idea to make it hard to see what was happening every time the action started. At the time, I believed it was an effect that was supposed to make the scene pop because it happened when bright effects work like lightning and fire took place. I thought it was just a dumb way to bring the focus in on a specific thing to emphasize it, but that logic wasn't at all consistent with what I was seeing. Every time somebody punched or got punched by somebody, the screen would darken. So I did eventually learn why so many shows have adopted this trend, and it's almost dumber than the reasons I could come up with. Supposedly, because Pokemon once burned a bunch of kids' eyes with its brilliant full-screen flashes, now everything that moves on television has to be blacked out for fear of inducing more seizures on kids. I don't think I really need to argue why this premise is totally stupid. I mean, nobody ever could get a seizure simply by watching people swing around fast, and if they can, they probably shouldn't be watching anime, or anything for that matter. It's probably best for them to stay alone in a pitch black room where nothing can hurt them. Kind of like how I live. It makes even less sense when you consider that nothing in anime is actually bright or flashy anymore. Yeah, in the 90s a lot of shows did flashing bright lights to portray explosions and energy, and it was pretty obnoxious. But that style died a long time ago. Everything, especially in shows like Attack on Titan and My Hero Academia, is carefully mixed so that the picture looks clean and even. There's no need for this visual meddling. Just imagine for a second if everything adopted this practice. Another thing I really despise about anime is ghosting. Ghosting isn't really all that popular across the board, but it's heavily used in shows like Naruto. Basically, ghosting is when somebody decides it's a good idea to take the product of many months of a talented animator's work and proceed to take the blur tool all over it until the perfect original creation is no longer recognizable. Essentially, it's blurring the animation to the point where you can't actually tell what you're looking at. It's super annoying, and honestly, it's tied even with, I don't know what to call it, blacking, I guess, and its ability to destroy perfectly fine animation. I think ghosting exists for two reasons. The first is more forgivable, which is that it's a tool to cover up poorly animated sequences. Production is tight a lot of times, and I guess if something is going to be so horridly ugly anyway, I might as well not have to look at it. But the other reason is probably more found. Ghosting is probably an enforced restriction for TV broadcasting. Probably for the same reason that blacking exists. From what I can tell, it seems to occur when things get super fast and crazy, but it's far more accurate to these moments than darkening is. so at least it has that going for it. It's definitely way worse though, because when the screen darkens you can still make out the line work, but with ghosting the image is ruined beyond repair. There is no editing that can be done to recover the original image. I wonder what it must be like for someone to spend a huge chunk of their time contributing to an episode, eagerly await its release, to experience their work on air with the fans, just to see that everything they did was blurred to oblivion. The final and worst of these is just poor effects work. My previous complaints were about things that intentionally destroy animation, but poor effects destroy animation by virtue that somebody overstepped their boundaries. Anything ranging from poor lighting, stupid glows, energy beams, auras that cover line work, blurs, and the like make watching something I might really like frustrating. I think you can sense the pattern by now. Everything that covers line art is obnoxious and poor editing. I don't want to see trashy effects on top of good drawings. The drawings should be the focus, and the effects should bring them out. Anything that takes precedence over real art is just poor. You know what, you might as well not cheap out and just draw the effects too. Now this is just a personal opinion of mine, but blurs should really be kept to a bare minimum. Dragon Ball Super was notorious for blurring smoke and dust animation, when it didn't make any real sense to. Smoke is actually super interesting to look at, and each artist has their own unique flair when approaching how smoke should look and behave. It's kind of surprising, but smoke animation is actually a clear telltale giveaway of a person's style. It's a real shame to see all that style and expression yeeted by dumb editing decisions. That's not to say Dragon Ball Super did everything wrong. I like the grain, rounder line work, and overall improvements of the Tournament of Power. But it's just when they set aside the blurs and the auras for the sake of clean character animation, it looked so much better. So that's pretty much everything I thought of. I actually had in mind that I would make a really short, unedited rant video this week, but after I painted the background for this video, I couldn't bring myself to waste it on a script I didn't spend equally as much time on. So yeah, I'm not sure when the next Zelda dungeon analysis will be done. I might play around with some other videos first. But I'm actually going to run into an interesting issue with the Zelda dungeon videos. Essentially, in order to make a full breakdown of the adult dungeons like the Forest Temple, the video would have to be at least 30 minutes. The problem is I can only upload 15-minute videos, so I really don't like the idea of splitting the analysis into 2 parts, and I also don't want to wait too long to upload it. Oh well. It appears the only solution is that more people are going to have to subscribe so I can make longer videos.